Our inner world shapes our boundaries, our self-worth, and the way we show up in our relationships. This week, we're going on a journey from overly kind to empowered kindness, which is really at the heart of Live Brighter with Tara. We're going over episode 28, which is people pleasing, the silent killer. Episode 30 gauge, how we can break free from toxic environments. Episode 45, the guilt trap. Why do you feel guilty all the time? Episode 67, the cost of overkindness and how to bring that to empowered kindness. So enjoy and make it a great day. Would you describe yourself as a people pleaser? If you think of yourself as a kind girl like myself, you're probably also a people pleaser. And I call people pleasing the silent killer. The reason why I call it the silent killer is because when we're out pleasing everybody else and focusing on that, on the external scorecard, we lose our sense of self, which can create intense loneliness, going through the motions, and just a really lack of fulfillment in life. God made us each unique and individual, and by not letting our light shine in that way, we really diminish ourselves and diminish what we can bring to the world. So where does people pleasing get its start? Well, like everything, there's a little bit of nature and there's a little bit of nurture. I think just how I was born, I was always a pretty nice person. I also think in my home that helped create that people-pleasing thing. And what research has found is that if you are in a home where the feeling of anger is not expressed, and that's like a emotion that's not allowed, then you start having to kind of remove that part of yourself and show up a little differently, which starts creating a pattern of people pleasing. Also, if you grew up in a home where you had an alcoholic parent or maybe a mentally unstable parent and you were walking on eggshells, anytime we grow up in a situation like that, we just learn to read the room and learn to read what's going on, part of just survival. Because as a child, we just take that in as like, to be a part of this group and to be a part of this system, we need to do that to survive. And so we just develop an easy people-pleasing way of being. The challenge is, as I just said, that doesn't serve us in the long run. So let's talk about the result of my people pleasing. So I was a people pleaser for a good 22 years in my previous marriage. And the cost to me was that I was physically having all sorts of problems and emotionally having so many problems as well. Only when it came to about like a system of 5 years of more destructive relationship, then I would just crump and not sleep. And that wasn't good for me. So I noticed this pattern, a chronic pattern going on in our relationship. And as much as I addressed it or, brought that to his attention, there just wasn't really any room for me. I remember asking him when we were going through the divorce, I'm like, why were you always trying to change me into your mom? I just don't understand. He's like, I was just trying to perfect you. And so as you can tell, in his mind, he was just trying to create me into somebody else. There wasn't a lot of room for me. And in order to survive in that system, I just became a people pleaser. He had a marvelous marriage. Challenge is I didn't, and I was really suffering, and that wasn't good. It wasn't an emotionally safe marriage, nor could he create that. Either he chose not to, or he didn't have the ability with his Aspergerish tendencies. So not really sure. But all I knew is the impact was on me was devastating, and I had a choice to make. I could either continue, be on medication in order to survive the relationship, or choose a different way. And I chose a different way, which was so different than my people pleasing, because this is what I ended up doing. I'm like, I have to make this choice. The challenge is I'm damned if I do, because it goes against everything I really, thought I believed in as far as with marriage and God and disappointing God and all of those and disappointing my family. But it would kill me and allow me not to be able to take care of my children if I stay. So either way, it was like, I just can't, there's just no good way to go. So I just decided and made a plan that's like, okay, I'm going to just, give 2 weeks notice, let him know, and then leave and not let any of my family or friends know, because they would all have opinions. And I was so used to being a chronic people pleaser, I knew I just couldn't stand with that. So I'm like, I just have to cut everybody else. I have to appear before God doing this, and I have to be at peace with that. and I cannot micromanage everyone else's emotions regarding my decision. So I left, looked crazy, and accepted rejection and all of that, and started to pursue a life with the kids. And it was really challenging, but so freeing. I mean, having been such a people pleaser and having really suffered from that, it just had to change. So the interesting thing is how that worked. I just had to trust God with the truth of the situation and with my future. So even though it had a great cost, it also had a great gain. And, with that said, even though that was a huge change, just leaving and standing on my own, I still struggle with honoring myself and people pleasing. I think as naturally a kind girl, this is something I always have to work on. I have to listen to my body a lot and be like, oh yeah, that is actually my body's saying no, even though I'm saying yes. And so it's just having to be connected with myself. I think it's interesting to think about the Bible as far as what it says about people pleasing. And I would say that God talks about how the fear of man instead of the fear of God is idolatry, basically. And so basically by elevating others' opinions before having God as my highest and main pursuit, then that was a form of adultery that I did. And so again, the order God has aligned for us is so beautiful, because it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then love others as you love yourself. So again, it's God, self, then others. And that is just super, super important. Also, it's very interesting. I feel like as people pleasers, we're basically either lying to ourselves about who we are, or we're lying to others about who we are. And I can attest that probably was accurate, even though it was wasn't intentional and it was kind of a mechanism of safety. But in the reality, that's what I was doing. So how do we recover from people pleasing? How do we be more present with ourselves and be ourselves? I would say 3 things. So first of all, just having an awareness of where it comes from, and just take an inventory of your life and who you are, as far as gosh, I do think I'm a people pleaser and I don't like the results of it, and it's actually not serving me and not healthy. And then second is you just start choosing to be different and make room for yourself. Sometimes it's a matter of even just getting to know yourself more, create that space. What do I like? What don't I like? What am I willing to compromise on? What am I not willing to compromise on? And really developing a good sense of self. And that's a beautiful thing, because we're all different, and that diversity in our world is what makes our world a better place. And then after you make room for yourself, then you start just making room for yourself with others. And that's basically just being more honest about your boundaries and who you are and what's important to you. As I kind of look at it now, I'm kind of the purple wall. I'm the purple wall that some people are going to look at and be like, ooh, I really actually don't like that color. And I'd be like, that's okay. I'm a purple wall. You don't have to like the color. I'm probably not for everybody. And that's okay. And just really being able to stand like that. And also just being our own best friends. And again, I always talk about that self-talk that we're talking to ourselves, and just being our own best friends and being at peace with that. So yeah, making room for yourself, and then making room for yourself with others. It's fabulous. And it's a lot of work for us people pleasers. So it's my responsibility to take care of myself physically, mentally, spiritually, and also knowing and expressing myself. That is my job, and I'm learning to grow in it daily. I feel like Boundary Boss, the book, is a wonderful resource to help with people pleasing and understanding that. That book, I did a book study with, I guess there were about 8 to 10 gals, and we were all chronic people pleasers. And we did that book, Boundary Boss, and it was actually life-changing, because so much of it is just learning the tools and putting in the time to make room for yourself. And that's a great book in order to do that. And that's by Terry Cole. So grow 1% every day, be more of yourself in the world, and let your light shine brighter. Make it a great day. Are you feeling stuck in with love, wealth, or peace? Well, you're not alone. Often it's a subconscious belief holding you back. That's why I combined life coaching and hypnotherapy together, so you can break through what's been keeping you stuck. Life coaching helps you shift your mindset, while hypnotherapy works deep within to reprogram limiting beliefs and memories. It's fast, it's effective, typically one session of each, and I have a few openings left. Are you ready for a change? Visit livebrighter.info and book your free consultation and see if this approach is right for you. See you then. How affected are you by the people you hang out with and by your physical environment? We're all a little different, and we're going to talk about that today. So we've been doing a 3-part self-love series, and that's been really great to really do that. I think it's very interesting when we talk about self-love because I look at it a little differently maybe. I don't look at it as like, oh gosh, we should look in the mirror and be like, oh, I'm so amazing and I love this and I love that. We've really talked about how our first obligation to our soul, that God gave us our soul and He puts it in a body, and our first obligation is to ourselves and to take care of ourselves physically, emotionally, spiritually. And so other than like what God says, to love Him with our heart, soul, mind, and strength and really enjoy that love and that relationship with Him, our second job is to learn to love ourselves. And I think it first starts with accepting ourselves, because it can be a big jump to be like, oh, I've gone from being mean to myself and not prioritizing myself to all of a sudden I'm prioritizing myself and talking to myself nicely. And that's why I always say that we're really growing 1% at a time. And so really it starts as a process of first accepting ourselves, accepting our past, accepting things where we are now, and being honest where we're at. And it's not like an acceptance of like, I'm great just where I'm at. It's like, this is where I'm at, having compassion on this. And these are, some things that I don't want to be there in my future, but just an acceptance of that I'm totally loved by God unconditionally and completely valuable, and just having that acceptance. And then just starting to talk to ourselves nicely. So that was one of our first episodes on self-love, was our self-talk. And then the second one was about starting to prioritize ourselves, our thoughts, feelings, desires, and making room for ourselves in the world. And now we're going to talk about our environment, our relational environment and our physical environment, and how we can love ourselves by taking those into consideration. So for me, I find that I'm very affected by my environment. I'm not only affected by my relationships, but I'm also affected by my surroundings. And actually people are to different degrees and different ways, but they find that we're really the reflection of the 5 people we hang out with. For me, having a home that is emotionally safe and physically safe is so important to me. Walking on eggshells like I did for years and years and years was devastating to my nervous system, and having a relationship where conflict was a silent, bloody mess was so destructive to me mentally. And so that was not going to work for me. The interesting thing is we're all a little bit different. Some of us are would be considered empaths, where we feel others' feelings a little bit more, or highly sensitive, where I tend to be sensitive to just foods and environment a little bit more than others, and we're all different, and it's great to make room for our differences. So this is really an opportunity to talk, but really I want you to focus on you and ask yourself questions as we're having this conversation about yourself, and to find out how affected are you more or less, and how do you want to intentionally do your environment. So let's talk about relationships first. In order to really know, is this relationship healthy for me? How do I feel about it? It's a couple things. First of all, I think you have kind of a gut feeling, but we have to know ourselves. We have to know, what is healthy for us as individuals, and what things are, things we won't tolerate in a relationship, in friendships, and kind of have boundaries about that. But a lot of that takes some work and some discovery on ourselves, and what works for us and what doesn't work for us. And I always make mention of the Unravel notebook that is available on Amazon, because that's a great way to do it's a 61-day deep dive, and it helps us to know ourselves, build confidence, and build those healthy relationships with God, self, and others. But really it stems from knowing ourselves and what's important to us. So just knowing yourself, and then also once you know yourself, creating boundaries, because it's not uncommon, especially as a kind girl, that we haven't said, hey, this isn't working for me. Can we talk about it? Let's, help me understand this. Or we simply have firm boundaries, which may look like something like, if you continue to do this, this is what I'm going to do, and stick with that. Like, it's weird to think that in a relationship it should be unconditional love. I think that's foolish. Or at least have unconditional love, but very clear boundaries. However you want to define it, I guess. But Mike and I have very clear boundaries. He's like, and if you have an affair on me, I'm going to divorce you. And that's a very reasonable boundary. And not that there was a problem in that area, but it's just, clear boundaries. And I have some with him. It's like, and if you choose to go down that path, I will not be with you. And that's very healthy. So having boundaries and learning how to have boundaries is really important in a relationship. I highly recommend Terry Cole's book, Boundary Boss. It's always, I read that book probably a couple times a year, just to kind of remind me of the reason why we make healthy boundaries, how do we do healthy boundaries, and kind of scripts to do it. Because as kind girls, it is not natural to have healthy boundaries. So that's the first thing, is relationship, knowing yourself, what is important, creating intentionally having healthy boundaries, and all of that. And then our physical environment, that's another thing to consider. And they very much tie together, because if you have a physical environment home, but you have an emotional relationship that is just toxic and destructive, for me, I just didn't give a shit how great my home was, because this relationship felt so awful that I would have rather lived in a box. But it's very interesting to look at that. But even if you say you have a good relationship and then you look at your physical environment, it's good to know yourself and know how to make your environment a thriving environment, something that is inspiring to you, that feels loving and feels good. And we're all different. So that's the part where it's like, hey, what works for me? What makes my heart happy? And it's good to really delve into that and give yourself space to do that, because we're all so different. One thing that I think is super important, speaking of there's no necessarily right way, wrong way, is to really watch comparison and comparing yourself to others. Because, it's not uncommon that I hear, I just feel like comparison in general is so destructive, because it's either elevating us or demeaning us, depending on how we're looking at us. And it's never, ever accurate. Because, our souls, this is our home. We know it intimately. Well, sometimes we don't, but we're supposed to know it intimately. What you see in other people is never a full knowledge. The comparison is never, ever accurate. And so I just see, it can be, and comparison is a habit, and it's a bad habit for the most part, because it's just a habit of, looking for either the bad or good to elevate, demean. Never healthy. So if you find yourself comparing, just work on that. I know some people that have gotten off of Instagram or different things just to protect themselves, because they know that's a trigger. And I think that's great. Just know how you work. So that's what we talked about today, is creating a healthy environment and how it affects you. And when we talk about the people we're around, and I focused more on our romantic relationship, but it's also other people. Are they draining you regularly? Are they adding to your lives? Do you feel obligated to be around certain people because they're relatives or you've been friends with them for a really long time? I'd really say assess that. That's really, to live the intentional life and to really grow, we have to intentionally take a look at that. And I think as kind girls, like I just heard my kids the other day say that, oh, this person said I should be friends with this other person even though I don't want to, because that's the nice thing to do. And I said, well, I don't think that's very nice at all. In fact, I think that's horrible. I would not want someone to be a friend with me or reach out to me because they felt obligated or they felt like it was the nice thing to do. I want someone to reach out to me and want to hang out with me because they like me. I go, so I think it's kind of deceptive and lying. So it's just another way of looking at it. So really, how are your relationships? How is your environment? Are you in relationship with people that are chronic boundary destroyers? Are they building you up? Are they adding value? Are you adding value? You have a choice, and it's great when you are intentional about those choices. Same with your physical environment. Creating a physical environment that's nurturing to you, that's healthy for you. Another thing I guess I didn't share in my physical environment is I have a Zen den. It's probably, and I don't even know why I call it that, except for that's what I got from Terry Cole. But it's probably only about, I would say, 4 feet by 4 feet, and I've got like my beanbag chair and lights and nice essential oils, and I do my journaling, and it's just a little space that's myself. And I can, I've got it blocked off in my closet, so it's in my big closet, and I've got it blocked off with a curtain. But it's just a little space for me to really do the work that I just think is so valuable on myself, and that I realize is super healthy for me. And I noticed my husband created his own space, and that's his like little office space, and that's been really valuable for him to have it look the way he wants. And I don't get to move anything or change anything, but have it just be his space. So that's just a way we've created a physical environment. And think about how you can create a physical environment that is nurturing to you and grow 1% a day. I believe in you, and live brighter. I'm offering some free pages of the Unravel Notebook to help support you along the journey and to correlate with this week's episode. So look for the link and enjoy. Have you ever tried to set a boundary and you felt so guilty that you actually took that boundary back? Or have you ever said yes to something when you really wanted to say no, but you felt way too guilty to do that? You're not alone. Guilt is a big part of a kind girl's life and can really be used to manipulate us and have a false guilt and really be choking. And so let's talk about guilt in our life. So where do we get this guilt, this overarching sense of guilt? Well, first of all, we have to remember that as kids, we're basically in an environment where we just cope with the environment we have. And so we get wired in certain ways. And so we can look back at our environment, the way we were raised, and to see how guilt was used in that environment. For example, if any of us grew up in a really religious household where guilt was used to manipulate and keep us on the straight and narrow, then it is probably very easy for us to have a bigger sense of guilt. My husband comes from a Catholic background, and that was the type of Catholic background he came from, where they use guilt to really keep people in line. And you just kind of get that wired in where there's just a lot more guilt than people that haven't grown up in that environment. It also comes from when we're kids and we express some of our wants and desires, and then we're made to feel like that's not okay. And I did this to my kids in this example I'm going to give you. Like, have you ever had or ever seen a situation where, like, you go visit the relatives, or in this case, I went to visit great-grandma-in-law, and great-grandma with her mushy lips just couldn't wait to kiss the grandchildren. And I have one daughter that definitely has a tendency to have like a stronger, like, no, I don't want that. And she was only like, just a little person at that time. And she did not want to kiss grandma with those big lips. And I don't blame her. But at that point, where I was at in my life and in my journey, I was like, no, give grandma a kiss. We don't want to make great grandma feel bad. She's old. So I basically manipulated my daughter into doing something she didn't want to do and kiss those squishy lips. And that's a great way to program my kids to undermine their own desires and feel guilty and be guilted into that. And, I had that a lot in my growing up too, and how guilt was used if I wanted to express like my own needs and wants and individuality to a degree. So it's interesting, like we can look back at our past, for example, like when we wanted to maybe not share a toy. How did that work for us in our family system? Was that like, oh, you're always being selfish? And obviously we want to train our children to share and stuff like that. And it's also good to train our children that they can have their own wants and desires and needs as well. So if you were like maybe growing up, possibly not allowed to have like, hey, I want time alone, or I want a boundary of keeping the door shut for a little bit, or I want a boundary on my space. And if that wasn't allowed, or you felt guilted into being like, hey, you're being selfish, that's not okay, you always have to share, things like that, it can kind of just get wired in us that we don't get to make room for our wants and desires and needs if it's different than the adults around us and what they want, desire, and need for us. So also we can have an oversense of guilt if we grew up in an environment where there was constant criticism or demeaning. Because as children, no matter what goes on, whether it's like parents have perfectionism, OCD, alcohol issues, a divorce, whatever it is, unfortunately, as children, we just assume it's our fault. It's like the way we're wired, because I think it's too much for our little brains to think that our adult caregivers aren't the best caregivers. Like that our little brains cannot fathom that. And so we automatically just put this guilt and be like, hey, it's our job, it's because of us. And so that can like adopt a belief system of guilt. So it's very interesting. So a lot of these false guilt, being manipulated by guilt, comes from our belief system that we've adopted. And we don't even know that we have adopted this. For example, like it's selfish to have your own wants, needs, and desires and to express them and make room for that in the world. And so if that's been taught to you and you believe that, then you're going to feel guilty when we try to like make room for ourselves in the world. So what happens is we can easily create patterns in our life where we use guilt, and this guilt can just be overarching. A big thing I think I've used guilt for, and I still struggle with this, is judging my own feelings. Like, I think I was always taught that there was like bad feelings and good feelings, and the bad feelings were bad. And now I know that feelings are information. They're not necessarily good or bad, they're giving us information. But if I had the feeling of like envy or jealousy or something like that, or what, then I would immediately go into guilt spin. I would call it. Just feel so bad and oh my goodness, what's wrong with me? Rather than now, I really work to be like, okay, I'm having envy. And then just be looking at it a little bit separately, like why am I having envy? What is it about this that's creating some envy? And it allows me to go into deeper things, because maybe the envy is related to like God has called me to have something and I don't, and I see something that I want, and that's okay. Or maybe I'm taking that too far and not being happy for them and for what God's given them. And so it just allows me to process things that are important to me. And so I can do that with like a lot of what I call negative feelings, but I automatically, when I have a negative, like quote unquote negative feeling, go into guilt. And so now I have to just step back and be like, oh, that was lust. Let's talk about this, Tara. And so it's very interesting how guilt can play a role as we judge our own emotions and feel guilty, rather than just being like, oh, that was an emotion. What is that telling me? Let's do a little digging here. That's information. So pretty interesting. Or saying yes when we really want to say no. That really comes from a belief that we should be serving others and others' needs are more important than ours. And serving is great, but it shouldn't be at the expense of ourselves all the time. And if our guts and our body are saying no, we really need to listen to that and respect that. And that is a work in progress to always do that. Another thing is what I call the shitty shoulds. I can definitely just should myself into doing things, and have been in the past. It's like, oh, I should do that, or I should be a good friend, or I should do that. But it's not coming from a heart of love as much as guilt. And I just don't really feel like that's where I want to be. And I don't think that really serves God. So I've, really kind of put a little alert in my head that if I'm using the word should to make me do something, then I really need to look at that a little bit closer, because that's just one of the shitty shoulds. So boundaries has been probably the biggest change in my life, from being a kind girl to a recovering kind girl to a person that can really make room for themselves in the world and really appreciate everybody else doing that as well. And setting boundaries and learning what boundaries are has been huge for me. And they're really ways to basically kind of protect ourselves and own who we are. I will say that when I first started setting boundaries, it was very painful for me, because automatic guilt. And I will tell you, even now, I will have guilt about setting a boundary sometimes, and I just have to say, oh, that's guilt. Let's process that. Let's ask guilt, let's ask it. What is it saying to me? And if it's something I want to adopt, or if it's something I want to believe, or it's something I'm just like, oh, that's false guilt, and I'm just going to renounce that in the name of Jesus. But I struggle. So I have a rule when it comes to setting a boundary, and I always am very mindful when I'm setting boundaries and being like, have thought it out, planned it out, sorted it out through my, the barf notebook process. And so just really setting a boundary and then not allowing myself to change it or anything for 24 hours. It's not even an option, because usually by the 24 hours that guilt has done its little thing, and it's a feeling that goes away. But it's very interesting that even now I can be very firm in what I want, and I could still struggle with guilt. And I think that's part of, my background in a kind girl, and I'm getting better and better 1% at a time. So how do we change this? That's what I'm always about, is like, how do we change something like guilt and work with it? And I think first thing is to understand the auto belief systems that are driving the guilt. Like, are we believing that our boundaries are hurting people, or that our wants are small? Or are we putting ourselves under perfectionism, and so we're feeling guilt a lot? So really trying to understand the auto beliefs and what's driving the guilt. So that's number one. And then number two, decide what you want to believe. What is important to you? What are your beliefs? I feel like my mom constantly wants to put her beliefs on me. For example, she has a belief system that if you're family, you should always be loved, accepted, treasured, and all of that. And I actually don't have that belief system. So, she'll have a sister come to town that I don't actually get along with well or anything. She's like, everyone needs to come over and this and that. And I'm like, I'm just not going to, and have a good time. And oh my goodness, that is just not in line with her belief system. And so she'll want to put that belief system on me, but I actually don't really believe that just because somebody is family, we should guilt ourselves or manipulate, ourselves into spending time with someone that we actually don't really get along with or don't really like at all. And so we just have a different belief system. So deciding what we want to believe, not what other people want us to believe, because they're happy to tell us what they want us to believe, but what is truly important to ourselves. And then number three is know ahead of time that you may have some false guilt, and that guilt may be a byproduct. And just know that that's probably going to be there, and have a plan as far as okay, I'm probably going to feel guilty, and I'll just stick with that for 24 hours. And then I can just do some self-care, do what I need to do to process this guilt, journal, and that's okay. And then really just, again, analyzing it and being like, okay, could this guilt be a byproduct of some change that needs to happen? Does it go against the value of I'm wanting to please others all the time? Or what is it? But I really believe, in the Bible, it talks about how, Jesus came to set us free, but we have an enemy that wants to kill, steal, and destroy us. And I think he loves using guilt to do that, because what's going to make us feel small and not want to be who we're created to be? Oh, guilt. Guilt's great at that. It keeps us small and caged. And so that's something to really know, that is the enemy's plan for us, to keep us small and not be who the image of God that God created us to be, all unique and all different with different wants, needs, and desires. And so really being like, hey, I'm just going to say no to that, because that guilt is false guilt, and I just don't accept that. So, and then also, if you do have some false guilt, or guilt that you're like, oh, I got to process through that, we can give ourselves self-care and support, and we can just kind of separate this from it, put the guilt in the purse and be like, oh, that's guilt. And that's because I've, put myself out there, and this is what I want, and I'll just keep that in the purse there. And I can journal about it. I can rest. I can give myself comfort. Stuff like that. And then the last thing is just seek some support. It's a lot easier for others to spot our false guilt and our belief systems that are kind of ridiculous than it is for us to see our own. And that's why it's nice to have a friend, a life coach, a counselor, whatever we need to kind of help us see our own brains. to see like, yeah, you have a belief system that you are going to hurt someone by having to, just set this boundary. And that's actually not true. That's what you're thinking. And so it's very interesting to, how important it is to have others in our lives to show us about false guilt and different things like that. So yeah, to change, got to understand our auto beliefs, decide what we want to believe, know ahead of time that we may have some false guilt, analyze it, and be like, know that the enemy likes to use guilt to keep us small, and then give us some self-care and seek some support. So let's all grow 1% at a time, a little less guilt, more guilt-free, and just loving ourselves and loving God and loving others more. Happy holidays. I wanted to make your season a little brighter and lighter. And so I'm offering 2 things for free. One is a relaxing meditation, and the other one is the BARF notebook. And that is the system for working through our feelings and our thoughts by barfing them out, sorting them out, and planning them out. Those are both for free on the website at livebrighter.info. So go ahead and go there and pick up your free gift to help support you this holiday season. And live brighter every day. Make it a great day. Overly kind to empowered kindness. What can happen in 8 years? So this week I'm talking about my 8-year journey from overly kind to empowered kind. And just to give a little context, 8 years ago, I was in my previous relationship and I was going to be on psych meds for the remainder of the relationship in order to tolerate it. And I realized I'd probably be in the psych ward every so often, as had been the pattern, in order to be in this relationship. And so 8 years ago is when I took my first empowered kindness step and started to advocate for myself in a healthy way. And now we're 8 years later, and now it's a completely different world, a completely different relationship, and it's an empowered kindness that motivates me. So it's kind of interesting looking at the contrast of 8 years, and what that means is growing 1% at a time. And I'll say a lot of my challenges really stem from my own belief system and how those beliefs had kind of entrapped me in a situation. And so there was a lot of work to do on myself. So that's why we're talking about this really cool contrast, because this podcast is all towards overly kind women and kind of all transitioning us to be more empowered in our kindness. So let's talk about it. So I call overly kind the kind girl syndrome, or the kind girl bullseye. And now I want to talk about kindness as being an empowered kindness. So the overly kind syndrome is I was kind at my own expense all the time, and I was compelled to do that. I was always thinking of others more important than myself. And so that came at a very toxic cost to myself. Now I'm still kind, and I'm still kind at my own expense, but it's when I choose to be and when it's in alignment with me. And I'm happy to serve and give, but it's very conscious. Before, I was definitely overgiving all the time. I was definitely an overgiver. Now I give and I receive, and I'm good at receiving, and that's a skill set I had to learn. Before, I tolerated bad behavior and destructive patterns. And, my reasoning was like, oh gosh, this is my cross to carry, and this is what I'm meant to do. And, that belief system was not helpful. And now I don't tolerate patterns of destructiveness in myself or in others close to me. And I do let people be themselves, but I do have my boundaries with them. Before, I was very much externally validated, meaning that how other people felt about me and thought of me was super important to me. I wanted the church's support, my friends' support, all of those things, and that was super important to me. Now, I'm much more internally validated and true to myself and very aware, and ask my, body, soul, and everything, and be like, okay, where are we at? What do we need? And really connected in that way, whereas that internal validation and that peace within that I'm being true to myself is much more important than external validation. Before, I was having a lot of physical challenges. I had symptoms. I had reflux. I had I had Hashimoto's undiagnosed. They thought I had thyroid cancer. I had all sorts of I had plantar fasciitis. I had pelvic, I had a lot of physical challenges. And so it's very interesting as I would say I'm physically connected and strong. That means that I listen to my body and its physical needs because I had a lot of stored emotions that were unprocessed in my body that were not helping. And my body was trying to speak to me, but I was not listening. And it just got louder and louder. And so now I try to listen to my body and ask my body, like, okay, what do you need? Do you need rest? Do you need nourishment? Do you need time to yourself? What do you need? Where are you at? And I've also worked on becoming just a lot more strong. My immune system is so much stronger. My immune system, wow, it was like always struggling. So it's really interesting to see just the difference of the physically struggling all the time versus physically strong. Not that I don't have, physical challenges, but it's just at a much better, it's just so much better, and just being connected to my physical body. So another thing with overly kind is I knew others. Like I knew what my kids needed. I knew my husband's, what his needs, wants, desires. I knew that, but I didn't really know myself as far as like what did I need, want, and desire. In fact, I didn't even really allow that. Like I thought that was selfish to have needs, wants, and desires. I'm like, that's selfish. It's all about serving others, and I don't ascribe to that anymore. Now I do know myself, and I know others. And I allow for myself to have wants, needs, and desires. 8 years ago, I was a boundary mess. That means, again, I ignored my wants, needs, and desires regularly, and I never really advocated for myself. Like, this is what I need, and this is how I'm going to follow up on those needs, and I can take care of my needs, but I also have to, incorporate these practices or whatever I need into my life. Versus now, I can have boundaries and I can have requests, and I practice that. And the difference between a boundary and a request is like we can't change others, like we can't control others, but we can make requests. We could be like, hey, I would really like it if you did that because, that would help me out in this way as we go through this. And a boundary is more like if you continue to do this, then I am going to do this. It's not controlling the other person. It's saying what you're going to do in response. And it's to protect yourself emotionally, physically, however you need to do that. And that's the difference between like a boundary and a request. 8 years ago, I would just forgive others, but the trauma in me was increasing. And I didn't realize that by forgiving and not processing that I was increasing the trauma in my life. And so now I process my pain and I process my trauma as they're brought to me from either my past, like whatever it is, and I process those things. So before, I was unconsciously going through the motions. And now I'm conscious about how my mind works. And remember, our mind works as we have circumstances, and they're neutral. Everyone would agree on those circumstances. But then we have thoughts about those circumstances. And it's the thoughts about those circumstances that affect our feelings, which affect our actions, which affect our results. And a lot of times what I was doing before, it was saying the circumstance is what is affecting my feelings. Or I would create better feelings by changing my thoughts when I wasn't really being honest about like my thoughts. I'd be like, okay, we're just going to focus on the good so I can have good feelings. But I wasn't really allowing myself to process those thoughts and be like, hey, why am I thinking? Why might I be thinking that? And allow for thoughts that were like in the closet thoughts. And so I really wasn't telling myself the truth and conscious about my thoughts and willing to dissect them and understand how it works. And now I'm always looking at like, how is my brain working? And what is this thought pattern and what are the results? And is that the results I want? And why are these thoughts important to me? So very conscious about that. Before, I used to attract people that were takers, very much on the narcissistic scale, and I was like the kind girl bullseye. Now I attract more like-minded people, and I love it. It's so fun. Before, I was definitely of the belief that I was not enough, and I definitely put others above me. And now I am of a belief that I'm more than enough, and it's because God loves me. Before, I had a very weary soul and a weary body. And now, again, like I'm soul attentive and I care for it. Before, I would take responsibility for others' emotions. If my husband was upset at me or, in a state, then I would take responsibility for that. And that did not have great results. Now I have love and respect for other people's journeys. I don't take responsibility for their feelings or where they're at. I give them the space and the respect to process their own journey. And if we're in a relationship, we work through those relational dynamics, but I definitely don't take responsibilities for other people's feelings and thoughts, and I do take responsibility for my own feelings and thoughts. Before, I was definitely more of a victim mentality and, what was happening to me, and now it's more of an ownership. Like, hey, I was actually part of the problem. I need to own that my decisions are leading to this result, and I need to own being part of the solution. And so victim to ownership. Before, I was trapped in my own thinking and beliefs. Now, I'm not as attached to my beliefs, and I'm very open to other people believing different and giving them the freedom to be that way. Before, I was very uncomfortable with silence. I was uncomfortable being by myself for long periods of time. Now I use silence and alone time to teach me, to show me what I may not want to hear, what I may not be listening to, and also have used it for my time to refresh. Before, I basically was increasing my own suffering, and now I'm understanding life and how things work and how our mind works and working with it. Before, I had very sacrificial love. Now I have an abundant love. I have love coming from just a healthy belief system that's creating abundance in love. And I'm giving out of abundance rather than sacrificially at my own cost all the time. Before, I was very stuck and very stuck by my beliefs and ideas. And as you can see, the list on that side was quite a list. And now it's all growing. And it's all part of growing, and I leave room for growth because I have not arrived, nor will I ever arrive. So that I leave plenty of room for all of that. So that's kind of the difference between that overly kind to empowered kindness. And there's a lot more about this in the Unraveled Notebook, and that's on Amazon. And that is a workbook that kind of takes us through that overly kind to empowered kindness. And also, I really love it when you guys reach out to me, and you can reach out on livebrighter.info on the website. And it's really cool to see your stories of how you're going from overly kind and suffering to empowered kindness and the beauty of that journey. And that's what I desire for all of us. And that's why I do this podcast, is because, as you can tell, that was a very challenging place for me, and now it's like a very empowering place, and that's what I hope for all of us. So live brighter 1% a day, and I believe in you. Make it a great day.